this section is covered in chapters 8 and 9 of the textbook. First thing is chapter 8 looks at something called market structures. Now, market structures is really just how the markets are formed up. It's kind of like you can imagine this initial part is really talking about or setting the table, I'll call it, for the next 3 units. So market structures are how trade occurs between buyers and sellers. So what is this interaction between buyer and seller? And as I say, they range from buyer-dominated structures. So perfectly competitive markets are what are called buyer-dominated. And what we mean by that is the buyer actually calls the shots on how much they're willing to pay for something. Okay, so the buyer has absolute control in a perfectly competitive environment. And as I say, it ranges from perfectly competitive to a monopoly. Now, in a monopoly, the seller has absolute control because realistically, if you're the only game in town, you're the one that's going to set the price on the product. Now, the only choice that the buyer has in that case is to buy from you or not. That's it. But the reality is, as they say here, the reality is that the real world kind of operates somewhere in between. So the two extremes are exactly that, and the real world fits somewhere between. And that includes monopolistic competition and oligopolies. So in this unit, we're looking at characteristics of the buyer-dominated, purely competitive market. Okay, so we're looking at I'll call it the one side of the structure first. So we're going to examine what economists call market structure with a focus on the firm's two most important output decisions. That is, what output will a firm choose to produce? So what level of output? And that's similar to what we talked about in the long and short run. And in the first chapter when we said what to produce, how to produce, and where to produce it, well, this is really what to produce. And what price will prevail is the other important issue. So it's the output, that's a firm's choice, and the price, which is really the market's choice. It is not the firm's choice. The firm can only choose to produce or not to produce or to find some range of production. The firm cannot pick the price in a purely competitive environment. That's the market that's going to do that. So to answer these questions, we need to know a lot about the market and which product and which products are being sold. So a couple of terminologies. And I should put a third terminology in here too, and I'll just mention the third terminology is really what we've been using so far, and that is the firm, okay? The firm is an individual entity that operates within an industry, okay? So we're gonna add to the firm that we've been talking about a lot, this idea of an industry, which is a collective name of all the firms producing similar products in a given industry. So pulp and paper, oil and gas would be industries, right? And the different firms in the industry may or may not know each other well. They may or may not be members of the same sort of common association, and they may not all agree on the various types of collective action. What they do have in common is that they produce a similar product using usually a similar type of technology. So, a fisherman in Newfoundland, for example, out in Jobat's Arm, who goes out and harvests fish, probably has very little to do with another fisherman who lives in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. But the fact of the matter is they produce products that are almost identical from a buyer's perspective. So I'll buy a lobster from someone in Jobat's Arm or a lobster from Yarmouth. Now, there are regional preferences with regards to lobster, but if you look in the tank at Sobeys, there's no real way that you can tell where that lobster came from. And even if you're a lobster connoisseur looking at a lobster, lobsters tend to look the same, okay? So the industry has lots and lots of players in it, lots and lots of players, and they're selling products that are indistinguishable from one another, like lobster. The market is really the interactions of both producers and customers and sellers and buyers, okay? So it's really that buyer goes to that seller and says, hey, you want to do a deal? And is there an interaction? If there is, great. If there's not, there's not. So really we're looking at the market and the industry are two new terms that are brought into this particular chapter. Now, From an economist point of view or a business point of view, generally we say there are 4 types of markets. There are many more, but generally if we want nice clean categories that we can lump stuff into, there are 4 major types of markets. The one we're looking at in this particular unit is the first one, perfectly competitive market. And what perfectly competitive markets do is they sell things that are called commodities. And a commodity, like a lobster, is something that looks to the buyer to be identical. If I buy grain, I go out and buy grain, to me, grain from someone in Alberta, grain from someone in Illinois, and grain from someone over in Moscow should look very much the same. To an untrained eye and even a trained eye, what's the difference? Grain is grain. Oil is oil. Now, the fact of the matter, there are subtle differences as buyers become more sophisticated. For example, there's different types. There's sweet crude, and there's bitter crude, and there's high sulfur crude in terms of oil. There's genetically modified grains, non-genetic, there's all kinds of permutations. But as a general rule, to the average Joe buying the product, a commodity is something that looks the same. And you, as a buyer, don't really care who you buy it from. You're looking for a steak. You're looking for some breakfast cereal. You're looking to fill your car up with gas. You're just interested in doing that. You're not interested in where it came from, who it came from, the ins and outs of it. So commodities tend to be, buyers are indifferent. They don't really care. They just want the product to do whatever they want to do. So that's a perfectly competitive firm. We also have monopolistic competitive markets. Now, what we mean by monopolistic competition is that effectively, monopolistic competition is almost the same as perfect competition. Almost. But the fact is that we have some slight difference in the product. Now, what is that slight difference? That slight difference is often put in by marketers. Okay, you should buy our breakfast cereal because it has more iron in it and is better for you. You should buy our gas because we put something in the gas that cleans your engine. You should buy our whatever, water. You think about water, bottled water, it's water. I mean, really. Oh, what does Newfoundland do? They got iceberg water made from icebergs. Now, realistically, if it's million-year-old ice, it's million-year-old water. All water's been around the same length of time. It doesn't matter if it was frozen or not. But from a marketing perspective, you can make your product distinguishable, or presumably distinguishable from some other, by creating this competitive difference. And that's what's known as monopolistic competition. And usually when you run into a competitive environment, most companies will try to distinguish their similar product from someone else's similar product. Okay, then we got oligopolies. Now, oligopolies are interesting ones, and there are lots of examples of oligopolies here in Canada. Because the fact is, when we have an oligopoly, we have more than one seller, but probably less than 3, or probably less than 4. The industry, it really depends on how big we're talking about, but we think of the airline industry in Canada, for example. The airline industry is a good example of an oligopoly. If you wanted to fly from St. John's to Vancouver, you only have 2 options. You can fly on WestJet or you can fly on Air Canada. Okay? So realistically, the airline industry in Canada, particularly from a national airline point of view, is considered an oligopoly. There are 2 potential suppliers of that product for you. So oligopolies have limited number of sellers selling virtually the same product. Virtually the same product. And, if we look at computer industry, technology, the technology industry is rife with oligopolies. You got Facebook, huge player. Google, huge player. Microsoft, huge player. Now tell me some more. it really gets limited with regards to the number of players who are in the business. And there are obviously thousands of players. But in terms of top of mind and what do we use every day, there's only 3 or 4. And finally, in terms of the market structure, we have a monopoly. A monopoly is a one-off. There is a single producer who is, so it's a firm, it's a single producer, who is the industry. So when we think of a monopoly is the only game in town. If you want to buy that product, you have to buy it from that company. Now, there's lots of examples of monopolies in the micro world. What I mean by the micro world is here in Clarenville, for example, or in Grand Falls, or Nain, or anywhere you may be, there are companies or businesses in that town that are the only place in town that you can buy that particular product. So if I wanted to go buy here in Clarenville, if I wanted to go buy a windmill, okay? I wanted to buy a windmill. There's only one place in this town that I can buy a windmill, and that's SW Energy. They're the only place that sell windmills in Clarenville. So they're a monopoly from the perspective of Clarenville. Now, do I have more choices if I say Newfoundland or Canada or the world? Yes, I do. So a monopoly oftentimes needs to be quantified in terms of a monopoly for a very small region or a monopoly for the world. That's the extreme. So we need to consider monopolies in terms of the context in which they're operating in. In Newfoundland, for example, we were to think about a monopoly. Newfoundland Power is a good example of monopoly. It's not as if you can efficiently and effectively produce electricity any other way than buying it from Newfoundland Power. Yeah, you might be able to put up some solar panels and you might be able to put up a few windmills, but you're not going to produce enough electricity here to support yourself reasonably to the degree that we want to live. If you want to live out in the woods, fine. But at the degree that most people want to live, that's not going to be a suffice. So you'll have to buy from Newfoundland Power. What are some of the basic characteristics of these 4 industries? Well, if we look at perfectly competitive environments, that's what we're looking at here. The number of sellers, wow, there are an infinite number of sellers. They're numerous. The type of products that they're selling, exactly the same. How easy is it to get into the market? Generally very easy, because if everyone else is selling it, obviously there's lots of people who can come into the market to sell it. Do you have any control over the price? None. Because if I set the price, let's assume that we're all selling exactly the same item. Let's go march ourselves down to Long Beach, okay? If you've been down to Long Beach, and let's go out on the wharf down in Long Beach, okay? And it's cod fishing season. So each one of us has caught exactly a 5-pound cod or a 10-pound cod, however, a cod. So we're holding up a cod. Each one of us, the 3 of us are on that dock, we're all holding up cod. And someone comes down and says, I want to buy a cod. And I say, well, mine's $10. And okay, so that's nice. How about yours? So we're gonna take a look at you guys now. So Christopher, you're gonna sell yours for, you say, well, mine's $5. And Marianne says, well, mine is $2. So we'll underbid one another. So realistically, you can say that we've got different prices, but the reality is that the $2 price is what's going to sell. So more or less, the market price or what people are willing to buy will be determined by the person there who's buying it from us. And if they say $2 is enough to pay for it, that's the only one they're going to buy. So Christopher and I have no choice but to reduce our price to $2 in order to be competitive with Marianne if we're selling exactly the same product, right? So this issue of a perfectly competitive market means that if you're selling your product in a perfectly competitive market, you have no choice but to charge what everyone else is charging. Look at gas stations. All gas in a given area is exactly the same price. You do not see gas stations with different prices. Now, are they perfect competition? No, they're not, but they're close to a perfectly competitive market. And we could say, yeah, that gas is pretty much the same. And realistically, if you go pump gas in Esso or in Irving or in Petro-Canada or in Ultramar, I mean, it's exactly the same product. It's a 87 octane gasoline that will make your car go from point A to point B like any other. And in fact, oftentimes it comes from exactly the same refinery. Okay, so this is the key one for this chapter we're looking at here. I'll just run through the others, and we'll look at these a little bit more as we get to them. Monopolistic competition. You have many sellers. They like, for example, in perfect competition, they use the word numerous in perfectly competitive, and they use the word many in monopolistic competition. Maybe not as many as in perfect competition, but there's still a lot. What do we do in order to make our product stand out? We try to differentiate our product. So let's go back on the dock down in Long Beach. My fish that I'm selling for $10 comes already cooked. Okay? Your fishes that you're selling are not cooked. It's the same fish, but I'm giving you an extra little feature. And I'm going to charge $10. I want $10 for it. Marianne, you're selling it for $2. So Christopher's going to have to reduce his price to $2. Will I have to reduce my price to $2? Possibly not, because mine has some distinction that makes it worthy of that extra price. It could be I'll put lipstick on it. You know, it could be any number of things that make it stand out and make it somewhat different in the buyer's mind. Is it easy to get into the market? Anyone can get into a monopolistically competitive market because, like the perfect competition, you know, generally the barriers to entry are low. It's pretty easy to start up selling your wares. The seller's control over prices, as I say, is not as bad as it is, and not as limited as it is in the perfect competitive market. As I say, I've done something with my fish in order to add value to it. I can charge a little bit more for it. But generally, I can't be out to lunch in terms of price. I have to be within a reasonable price of my competitors. And, you know, we think about restaurants, convenience stores. That's exactly what they try to do. They make their product stand out somehow or another. I always go back. I bring myself back 30 years now. I lived in Fredericton. And I used to drive to Oromocto, which is just a 20-minute drive outside of Fredericton. I used to go out to Oromocto to buy my gas. And why? Not that it was any cheaper. It was the same price as it was in Fredericton, you know. But I went to Schulten's Shell station out in Oromocto. Why? Because they had the friendliest staff. They had the nicest store, nice, friendly staff. They'd always, you know, it was worth the trip. It was worth the trip to go to Schulten's. So again, what they tried to do was differentiate by super friendly service and nice people. The oligopoly it tends to be broken down into two types, and really those two types mirror the perfectly competitive versus the monopolistic competitive. And that is an undifferentiated monopoly, which sells exactly the same product. Okay, so there are few sellers of oligopolies, hence there's only 2 or 3, like the airlines. The type of product is identical, flying from point A to point B. Is, you know, that travel is pretty much an identical product. The ease of entry is difficult. You got to buy those airplanes; they're expensive. The sellers control over price. They do have some degree, but not crazy. And so they, you know, you think about oil refinery and that sort of thing as an example of that. A differentiated oligopoly, again, like a monopolistic competition, there are a few sellers, but what they try to do is differentiate the product. What you know, if you think about WestJet over the last number of years, what WestJet has really done as they started is to say to you, the buyer, that they're a different type of airline. They always consider as Air Canada as kind of old farts, whereas WestJet was the nice, friendly, owner-owned company. So just to differentiate. And otherwise, ease of entry is the same, it's difficult, and sellers control. They have more control because what they do is they make it different. And you will see airlines will often do that. Automobile dealerships will do that. Car companies in themselves will do that. You know, car is a car. But it's not in a buyer's mind. People have definite preferences over one car over another. Finally, we've got the monopoly, where there's one seller It's a unique product. You can only get it from the one seller. It's very difficult to enter because, again, usually there are very high costs to become a monopoly. Newfoundland Power, for example, to set up all that infrastructure costs lots of money. You have a lot of control as the seller over the price. And public utilities, cable companies, Danny Williams and the other guy, they own the Growlers now. They're in a fight with St. John's. They made their fortunes on cable, and that's where they got their money in the 70s was in the cable industry. So that was a monopoly, and that made them very well off. How do markets differ? Well, economists really tend to differentiate based on the type of product being sold. Do all producers sell an identical product? And in monopoly, doesn't really matter. But in a purely competitive environment, the identicalness of the product makes buying from one or the other indifferent in the buyer's mind. And what we try to do in order to bring it into monopolistic competitive world is to vary the product somehow or another, paint it a different color. Henry Ford used to sell the Model T, and Henry was quoted as saying that you could have any color you wanted, provided it's black. Okay, that was the big joke about the Model T. Well, General Motors came in the 1920s, and what did General Motors do to differentiate their car from the Model T, which really was the key to the market? They put colorful cars on the road. General Motors introduced colors to car manufacturing. And that's what really made them stand out. And that's what got their toe in the market there. If we think about the number of buyers and sellers interacting in the market, that's going to have an impact on the type of market too. Is it populated by many firms and many customers, or is it dominated by a few big players? So we really need to think about that. So the number of competing firms and the way they produce indicates just how much power one firm might have over the entire market, or how easy or how difficult it is to get into that market. If we look at perfect competition, it's a market in which the participants are all price takers. They don't set the price, the market sets the price. So what are some of the features of a perfectly competitive market? Well, homogeneous products, meaning the products are exactly the same. You're selling water, you're selling gas, you're selling blueberries, you're selling whatever. It's the same. Oil, it's the same. Free entry and exit, meaning that generally, if I went and picked some blueberries, I could get into the blueberry business very easily. It's not that hard for most purely competitive products to get into the market. If you go up to the market on Saturday, for example, you'll see that the craft industry is an example of a fairly competitive, not perfectly competitive market. Because if you look at craft producers, they tend to be selling essentially the same things. Yeah, you could say they're selling different things, but the crux of it is, in terms of it's trinkets, items that people put on their shelf, these sorts of, it tends to be that sort of thing. And if you have any ability in crafts, whatever, you can get into the business like anyone else. What you tend to have is stuff that's easily duplicated. If you can make a quilt, I can make a quilt. If you can make this little glass feature, I can make this. So it's very easy to get into the business. Not only is it low barriers to entry in terms of dollars and cents, it's low barriers to entry in terms of training. Anyone can really do it if they put their mind to it. Another thing is that they have the words they use here is a perfect knowledge of the prices and the technology. Normally, there's not a lot of technology involved in a competitive business. It's cod, it's blueberries, it's oil and gas. Now you're going to say, well, yeah, there's some technology involved. Yeah, to get it out of the ground, but the fact of the matter, the raw product tends to be fairly common, tends to be natural. It tends to be, stuff that everybody could potentially do. And a perfect knowledge of the prices means that generally there's nothing hidden there. The price is the market price, so everybody knows the price. No transportation costs. I don't know if I would use the word no transportation costs. Probably not. Transportation cost is not a big function of the cost of the product. even oil. We could think oil, is fairly expensive to transport. Yeah. You put it on a super tanker and ship it across the ocean. That is fairly expensive. But the cost per barrel or the cost per liter of transportation is relatively low. Of the total cost of the product versus the transportation of that particular item, it's relatively low. No artificial restrictions. Meaning that the government really hasn't gotten involved to tell you got to sell it for this or you got to do that with it, or it doesn't have a lot of laws surrounding it, and lots of buyers and sellers. So, and that's really the key one, is that there are lots and lots of people interested in buying it, and lots of people interested in selling it. So in this particular chapter, in this first chapter, we're explaining the conditions necessary for a perfectly competitive market to exist. We're using two approaches to explain how firms might maximize their profits. And we're looking at the first and obvious one, how much money do you make in terms of maximum profit. And the other one is something called marginal analysis, which looks at how much extra can you earn by selling one more versus how much it costs extra to sell one more. Explain what's meant by break-even price and shutdown price. Now that's an important one because it helps explain from the theory helps explain why companies will continue to operate despite the fact that they're losing money, or at what point they say, how bad things are when you got to shut something down, such as what happened with the oil industry out here. Why, for example, the White Rose Extension project got shut down. Explain the benefit of perfectly competitive markets, develop an understanding why perfectly competitive markets may fail to achieve their desired results. We see lots of examples of that. Develop an understanding of how too much of a certain undesirable product might be produced in competitive markets, and develop an understanding of why certain desirable products may not get produced at all. That's always true. So we've seen here that if we look at a perfect competitive market, we've seen this already. Here it is again. The number of sellers, lots and lots. The type of product, it's identical. You cannot tell the difference. If I pick the blueberry, if you pick the blueberry, it's a blueberry to whoever buys it. The ease of market entry and exit is relatively easy. It's easy to get in and it's easy to get out. The seller's control over the price, none. The market determines how much the product sells for. There's lots of examples of industries: oil, iron ore, salt fish. And this is the challenge with Newfoundland. And it's a challenge with Canada. We are hewers of wood and drawers of water. That tends to be what pays the bills in this province. There's technology industries, no doubt about it. But if you look at where the money comes from that keeps this province or keeps this country going, a lot of it comes from natural resources. Natural resources tend to be commodities. Iron ore, coming out of Labrador, 1/3 of all the iron ore in Canada is produced out of Labrador. Oil and gas, we produce a significant amount of oil that's produced in Canada is off the east coast here. Mining, besides iron ore, we got gold, and we used to have asbestos, we used to have lead and zinc, but tends to be nickel up in Voisey's Bay. These types of things tend to be commodities that are open to the market. So if the market wants them, they'll pay a high price for them. The market don't want them, pay a low price. This is what happens when you see the ups and downs of these industries. And the fishery is a classic example. The fishery is selling generally raw products. So sometimes they can get really good prices. Like, for example, this past year, the price of crab was really high, and the people into the crab business made a lot of money. Cod prices are always up and down. Scallops, lobster, you name it. Fishermen are always on talking about how the price is not what they want. So generally, they don't set the price, the market sets the price. It's a competitive environment. And because of the fact that we live in an environment that we produce a lot of these commodities, we tend to be open to the ebbs and flows of the market. So as a result, sometimes we have good times in Newfoundland and sometimes bad. So what are the 4 conditions that got to be met in order for a firm to be considered a perfectly competitive market? And this is why it's very difficult for firms to meet this test. As I say, it's a theoretical construct more than a reality. The first one is there must be many buyers and sellers, all of whom are price takers. They don't set the price. They don't tell the price. The price is determined by the market, and that is the price that is charged. And what do we mean by the market? That's the agreed upon price by laws of supply and demand. Two, there are no preferences shown for the buyer. So we're down on the dock, and whoever comes to buy is going to buy from either one of us. They don't care. Irrelevant. Firms can easily enter and exit the market. Easily to get in. I can set up a booth up at the farm and market easily. I can decide not to set up a booth at the farm and market easily. Everyone, buyers and sellers, have complete and timely information on the product, prices, and availability. Normally, for example, the stock market is a good example of a tool that is used to inform people how much price, how valuable a product is. And I shouldn't use the word stock market. I should use the commodities market. It's the stock market, but it's for commodities. So things are traded on that market hourly. You can go look online for the price of hogs, which is, if you're over in PEI, for example, we get the fisheries broadcast here. Over in PEI, they get the hog report. These things tend to be defined by some tradings somewhere in the world that says this is the price of oil, this is the price of hogs, this is the price of fish, and everybody knows it because it's widely available. It's put up online, or everybody knows what the price is. So these are the criteria for us to meet in order to be a perfectly competitive market. And I think you can make an argument that not all of these are true in most cases. So as a result, perfectly competitive markets are rare. The perfectly competitive industry is made up by thousands or hundreds of thousands of firms. So a firm is very small in relation to the total market and inconsequential in terms of the industry. So the firm really has no influence on the price. So this is why we say they're price takers. It is a price taker in the truest sense of the word. No matter how much it decides to produce or market, the market dictates how much it will buy the product for. So if you're selling blueberries, if you decide to make a gallon or 100 gallons, you're not going to influence the price of the berries. So if we look at it, and we look at it from a demand curve point of view, there's the demand curve right there. So the demand curve for a purely competitive firm, therefore, is flat. So no matter what the quantity, if you look at quantity being on the bottom, the price is going to be the same. So if you pick 1 gallon of berries or 100 gallons of berries, that price will be the same. So the demand will be flat across the range of prices. And that's an important concept, because we know that a flat line means that it's perfectly elastic, the demand for that. So commodities, here's simple examples of typical commodities. And as I say, this guy, another fellow from Buckins here, oil prices plunge could cause a substantial loss in revenue for Newfoundland. As I say, we're open to the ebbs and flows of the world. And last year, the price of oil sunk so low that it really did the job on Newfoundland's finances. And the government have predicted now that we'll have about $60 a barrel of oil. I think it's up around $80 now. But it's only now that the economy is starting back up again after COVID that the price is actually getting reasonable again. For the last 18 months, the price of oil has been down in the toilet. In fact, Alberta oil, there at the start of COVID, was selling for negative amounts. They had to pay people to take it. And that was a real crush to the Alberta economy. So what's a firm to do in this environment? Well, in a perfectly competitive market, individual producers and consumers have absolutely no control over the price. And this forces a firm really to say, we ride the market. Whatever the market pays is what we get. So since an individual manufacturer can't affect the price, the only decision is to figure out if we're going to produce and how much. Okay, so that's the thing. And really, if we're going to produce is a pretty easy decision. The harder decision is how much should we produce. So what is the criteria for how much should we produce? And the criteria normally for most firms, and again, we're assuming rationality here, is determining what level of production gives us the greatest possible profit, okay? And ultimately, that is going to be the drivers for firms in a perfectly competitive market. What level of production can I produce the most profit at? So here's an example. We've got output from 0 to 10 here, and we see that the price across that range is $20. Now, we've just seen over here that our quantity per period, the $20 is going to be consistent regardless of what the quantity produces, because that, by definition, is a perfectly competitive environment. We don't set the price. So remember now, this is the firm we're looking at. So we are one small player in the industry. The industry price is set at $20. We can produce various levels of output. That's our choice. That's basically what we have a choice on. This is not our choice. We don't choose what the price is. To do the total revenue, we just multiply output by the price, and that gives us our total revenue. If we look through the list, you'll see that total revenue goes up. Okay? Then we ask ourselves, well, what's the average revenue? And the average revenue, we'll notice, is exactly the same as the price. Because if we took the average revenue, which is our total revenue divided by the output, it will come back as the same as the price. And then we ask ourselves, well, what's your marginal revenue? We looked at this in the long and short term. We've done this. So what's our marginal revenue? Well, let's see. How much extra do we make by selling one more? What do you find? You'll find marginal revenue is exactly the same as the price. Here's an important takeaway. Total revenue, average revenue, and marginal revenue in a perfectly competitive firm are always the same. Okay? Total revenue equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. So that is one of the telltales of a perfectly competitive industry. And it's because of the fact that the price is not determined by the firm and the price is consistent across the various levels of quantity. So all we have to do all our options are as a firm is to say, what will cause maximum profit? We don't have profit in this list, but we need to be able to figure out what are our costs and say, let's look at our revenues. What level will yield us the biggest profit? So let's add the profit component here now. Again, we've got the various levels of output. We know the price, and we know the price equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. We know our total revenue is just multiplying one by the other. Let's assume that we're given our costs. Okay, so this is our total costs. Keep in mind, total costs is made up of fixed costs and variable costs. But anyway, for our purposes, all we need to worry about is cost here. So we simply subtract our costs from our revenue, and we come up with this, which is our profit. And you'll notice we don't make any profit with 3 products or less. We're into a negative here. We break even at 3. We start making money from 3 to 7 units of production. And we start going, we break even again at 8, and we start losing money after we go past. Now, we've known based on our short and long-term discussion of why this happens, right? As we get bigger, our costs will go up, these sorts of things. We run into inefficiencies. So the fact of the matter is there is a sweet spot that we need to operate in. The sweet spot in which we will make a profit falls somewhere, well, if we consider break-even adequate, our break-even happens at 3, and our break-even happens at 8. And we can actually plot this, and if we plot it, we can see, okay, maximum profit is the distance between total revenue and total cost. We want to find the greatest distance, i.e. the greatest profit. So we're going to operate at the greatest profit point. Now we can look at it on the graph right here. We know that it's at 5.5 really units, but let's look at it here. Right here, 5 and 6, between 5 and 6, our profit is maximized. So certainly our output. Now, I would ask, why would we make 6 units if we can make $30 profit? If we can make 5 units and make $30 profit, it's just, why bother to make that last unit if we don't need to? So probably 5 units of output would be our best option. 6 units will work too, but 5 units of output is certainly the best option in this case. Okay, so we can see here I should also show this, that this line here is just our total profit here, and you can see our profit is highest. Okay. So that basically is that first type of approach. Okay, that first type of approach looks at this idea of seeking profitability based on simply taking our total revenue and subtracting our total cost to get our profit. And this profit will tend to take this type of pattern where we lose money with not enough production, make enough production, we break even, we make enough production to make some profit, and then we start losing money again because, again, the economies, we run into diseconomies of scale, and this proved it. So we're going to want to operate in the maximum profit zone. So as I say, 5 or 6 units is certainly going to give us maximum profitability, okay? So it's a good way to say, okay, here's the decision we can make. The decision we can make is how much, nothing more than that. We can't affect the price, but we do know that we should sell 5 or 6 products in order to maximize the profit. Now, okay, that's the first approach that companies will use in order to make that decision to produce a certain amount. There's a second approach too. And the second approach, again, it doesn't matter which one you use, but just understand how this one works. Now, this one requires you to think about the marginal. And all marginal is the difference between what you made on this unit of production versus the next unit of production, okay? So we went from 5 to 6, for example, or 4 to 5, or whatever. So we're asking ourselves in the marginal approach, how much extra did I make by producing 1 more unit of production? Okay? So we're looking to compare at the 5th level and the 6th level, 5 units of production versus 6. How much extra did I make? That's the first question you ask. The second question you ask is, how much extra did it cost to go from 5 to 6 units of production? So let's assume 5 to 6 units of production, we made an extra amount of money. And let's assume that 5 to 6 units of production, we incurred extra cost. What marginal does is it says, look, keep making extra units of production, provided you make more money comes in on going to that next level than goes out. In other words, our marginal revenue, as long as our marginal revenue is greater than our marginal cost, the extra bit of money we get coming in is greater than the extra bit of money that we got going out because of the cost of it. As long as it's greater, keep making more. The moment that the amount of extra money you make from going one level to the next matches the amount of extra revenue, extra cost that you incur by going from that level, stop producing anymore, because you're not making any extra money making that extra unit. In fact, presumably, after you've crossed the barrier where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, your marginal revenue is going to go up, but your marginal costs are going to go up by more. So you don't want to lose money by making more products. So a firm maximizes its total profits by producing an output at which marginal cost and marginal revenue are equal. So if we look at this one here, okay, we look at this one here, here's the total cost, and all we've done is the same thing. Here's our 10 units of production. Here's our total cost. And the marginal cost is this extra bit it costs to go from one level to the next. 30 to 48 is 18. 48 to 58 is 10, and so on. That's our marginal cost. And our marginal revenue, which is the same as the price, is 20. So we're saying, how much extra did we get? How much more was the revenue versus the cost? Well, the revenue in the first case was 20. The extra revenue was 20. The extra cost was 18. 20 minus 18. We made $2 extra by going 1 more unit of production. We do that with each of those, and what we'll get is we will get this type of pattern here. Marginal cost, we got 10, 8, marginal surplus, in other words, marginal revenue over marginal cost is positive, 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 0. So at 6, our marginal revenue equals our marginal cost. We stop at 6 because that's 0. That's where, and you'll notice as we go even higher, we went to 7, for example. The cost of making the extra unit is $30, and the extra revenue by making that extra unit is only $20. Why would we do this? So the marginal approach says, as long as we're making extra money, making extra ones, let's keep going. The moment that it costs us the same amount to make that extra bit of money, stop making any extra. So the marginal approach is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And this is where you see right here. And you can see where it crosses there. So that slide shouldn't be there. This is demonstrated right here. Just one last thing this morning. I just wanted to look at this, test your understanding here. And given the accompanying data for Marshall's Meat Limited, calculate the level of total profits at each output and what's the break even and profit maximizing output. So all we have there is we have outputs from 0 to 8. We have a price, and the price is standard throughout. One of the key attributes of a perfectly competitive market, right? Doesn't matter what level of production we produce, it's $50 because that's what the market says. We can't influence that. And our total cost. So really all we got that's varying is our output and our costs. So let's look at our costs. Well, in this particular case, if we look at the first instance, our price is 50, our cost is 40. So our total cost here, total revenue is a combination of the price times the output. So 50 times 0 is 0, 50 times 1 is 50, 50 times 2 is 100, and so on. So there's our total revenue. Here's our total cost as dictated right here. So if our total revenue is 0 and our total cost is 4 by producing 40 by making nothing, our profit is minus 40 by not producing anything. As we ramp up our production, we'll come up to 4 units of output. 4 units times $50 each is a total revenue of $200. Total cost is $230, so we're losing $30. As we move into 5 units of production, we are 5 units times $50 each. $250 total revenue. Our cost at that point is $250. We are at break even. In other words, our total revenue equals our total cost. The 6th unit of production, we have $300 coming in. Total cost is $280, and that gives us a 20. That's our maximum profit. Then we hit break even again at 7, and then we lose money. So if we looked at it from a profitability point of view, profit maximizing output, this yields 20. 6 is our highest level of profit. So that's as far as we're going to go here this morning. Any questions?